Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host. Quiet on the set. Our coverage of Oscar nominees in the technical categories continues, and today we're talking about production design. Let's introduce our guests. First, Eve McCarney, production designer. Back in season 9 of the podcast, we talked about your work on American Horror Stories, and your production design credits also include The Ballad of Lefty Brown and Into the Dark. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Next, Julie Drach, set decorator and first-time guest. You worked with Eve on American Horror Stories, and other noteworthy credits include Key and Peele and Dear White People. Glad you could join us.
Hi, thanks.
And in our final chair, lead man Kerry Weeks, frequent guest of the show, and your credits include the upcoming film Leave the World Behind and the Apple Plus TV series Severance. Always a pleasure.
Hey, Skid. Good to see you.
Listeners, if you want to learn more about my guests, please look them up on the Internet Movie Database. Below the Line has a page, and if you start there, you can simply click through on their names and see their credits in the list. The 5 films recognized by the Academy for Production Design are All Quiet on the Western Front, Avatar: The Way of Water, Babylon, Elvis, and The Fabelmans. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this awarding. Once again, we like to recognize our below-the-line compatriots by name, even if it means I'm occasionally mispronouncing some of them. Apologies in advance. First up, All Quiet on the Western Front, production design by Christian M. Goldbeck, and set decoration by Ernestine Hipper. Now, I don't care who starts. You guys can choose amongst yourselves. We can,
I'm happy to talk about this one.
Julie, please.
I thought it was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. The palette was so controlled. And I think in these vast landscapes, like watchers don't have any idea how much stuff goes into that. Like how all your set dressing, all your pieces and parts just get eaten up in that landscape. So there's so much work going there. And I think that they did such a good job with textures, like maintaining this controlled palette. Like the wood is raw and eaten and shot, and all the dirt, the mud, everything. It was just absolutely beautiful. I also saw that it was maybe a $20 million movie, which is a little bit shocking. It seems like if they accomplished that with that budget, I think that's absolutely insane. This is one of my personal favorites in this category.
I think if they gave an award for best mud, it would definitely go to All Quiet on the Western Front. I was very impressed with the granular detail that they went into in the trenches. It was just, I wanted to freeze the frame and just check every inch of it. And like you said, it is so easy to, in a set that size, to just swallow stuff up. And so it takes an immense amount of material to have it look fully fleshed out and not like a set. And they really did that. The amount of detail that they put into each of that is just really astounding.
It all felt so full and rich. And then also to your point about best mud, I feel like this is one, like we all know that everything's such a collaborative effort in any kind of filmmaking, but this one in particular, I feel like special effects within the production design of the film, like that collaboration, I feel like is so distinct in this film.
Absolutely. Whenever you add water into a set, I think it's really challenging. And they were in standing water in several scenes. And I had the same thought, Julie, of like, wow, they really had to collaborate on that. And I feel like you could really feel the despair of the characters on both sides. They did a really good job of that, making that come through. The designer was quoted as saying he wanted the people not only to see it, but to be able to smell the set, which I thought was really interesting. And I think they accomplished that with all the detail that they put into it. And to your point, being down in those foxholes and those trenches, it was the type of wood they used, all the little accoutrement that existed because they were in those spaces, they were living in those spaces. The detail was just off the chart. And 20 million, I'm with you, Julie, that's incredible.
That's mind-boggling that they could do that.
Worth a deeper dive. I tried to look at a few sites to see if that was real at all, and also that it was apparently shot in 55 days, but I shouldn't be quoted on that. That's what Wikipedia says. But
okay.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing.
They were in Europe, right? So sometimes, depending on where you shoot, your labor costs, a lot of your material costs can go down. They shot
Absolutely.
Elvis in Australia. I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but there's a big savings there from shooting in Tennessee.
Yeah, I think they shot outside Prague, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Europe, yeah, that makes total sense.
I also really appreciated, just to follow through on this a little bit more, the juxtaposition of the trenches and the front line. And then when they would pull back in the beautiful spacious shots of the woods and the fields, the farming fields, and then the interior spaces of the political class, the train car and that chateau that the German general was set up in. It was really interesting too, the focus on food among the political and ruling class. It showed a lot of eating there,
right?
And how hungry the trench people were. So props too was just the propping in that movie was really excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the whole team was fantastic.
Yeah,
delivered. Yeah.
We discussed this film on our episode about visual effects, and those guys quipped that whether it was a visual effect or completely set decoration, the fact that the French trenches were much nicer than the German trenches. They had wine and just a little bit more. And I'm wondering if you guys also noticed that small detail, or if there are other details of that nature that hopped out at you guys when you watched it.
Now that you say it, I'm like, yes, I remember that now. And it's interesting to show the different class of the two people.
I did notice that they kind of made a point of showing that the French had more and better food, but everyone knows that. So,
yeah.
All right. The second film on our list is Avatar: The Way of Water. Production design by Dylan Cole and Ben Proctor, and set decoration by Vanessa Cole.
I find it so interesting, Avatar, because you're designing a lot of it in camera. And I know even on the first one, they talked a lot about the camera that Cameron built that they had to work within, and they had a special visual effects designer doing that work. And then they had to collaborate on the real elements. And they have two designers again this year. The palette is just so rich and vibrant. It jumps off the screen at you. It's almost neon. It's so beautiful. It must have been so fun to design in those bright, vivid blues and pinks and purples. And just, it's so imaginative. I saw some of their weaving research to create some of the bridges in the one community, and very inventive, a lot of organic shapes, right? Things that were nothing was really square. They were all trapezoidal or had some sort of arc or curve to them. Very inspiring, very beautiful. And it must have been a huge undertaking to pull all of those worlds together into one film.
Absolutely. I feel like I sort of have a penchant for things that are real life and tangible. So when I was thinking more about this film in terms of this conversation, I really had to remind myself to appreciate that everything was designed. It wasn't like, and then we'll grab a bunch of horses and then they could be riding horses. It's like, what does the animal look like? What does the flora and fauna look like? Like everything is ground up, designed, and the creativity behind that is so massive. And their team was massive. Just looking at that ADG presentation, like the end where they kind of list everybody. I mean, just so much work and so much artistry in it. I have no concept of where, like, what's practical and then what becomes effects. Like, and I read an article where they were like, they not only had to build things, they had to build things in different forms, like different scales. And even for them, it was like a process of learning and figuring out like what exactly you need for what. And I think the whole process is fascinating, but it's also striking. I mean, it's really beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I was blown away by it and really pulled into it as well. Aside from the sort of weak and basic storyline, the world, I wanted to go there so bad. I wanted, it was all I could do to not try and book a week-long stay there when I got out of the movies. Yeah, and I also really was very impressed with the merging of the whole underwater part when the ship was going down and they're trapped underwater. All of that was just incredible, and it had to be incredibly difficult to pull off. And it was really seamless between all the CGI and that. So yeah, it was a totally immersive experience and quite incredible.
And not just the worlds that we know are imaginary, like your underwater worlds or your villages and like these crazy mangrove roots or whatever, but even their like human earth, like lab interiors, like the place where they store all the bodies, like those are beautiful. And those are, I mean, are predominantly practical sets, but like also incredible design in the earthy real world aspect as well.
Yeah, it felt very cohesive altogether, like everything, same level of ingenuity and design and thought. Seamless is the perfect word for that film.
I love the mangrove, the giant enormous
roots.
mangrove village.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was
so
very
cool.
clever, where they would take real earth items, but then sort of meld them or morph them into the I don't recall the name of the world that they were on, but
They took like something ordinary and made it fantastical by playing with scale, right?
exactly,
And creating a community within that. It was really smart.
which is really very effective too, because it feels not completely alien, but very foreign.
Right.
Totally.
I think that helps pull me as an audience member. It made it very relatable, but at the same time, incredibly exciting and new.
I think that's what you have to do when you're in fantasy. I think you want some level of familiarity so you don't feel completely detached from it. You know, you kind of need to feel a little related to it in some way. So the mangroves was, really brilliant, really, really good idea there.
I remember we talked a bit about that last year in Dune, where Dune used a lot of earthbound objects, books, furniture, whatever, but in a different context, in a different setting, and it just pushed it into that alien or foreign realm, but not completely. Like you said, it was something that you can relate to.
Yeah, I think that really helps when you're telling those kind of stories. It can also be fun to push the limit all the way, I guess, but I always relate the most to ones that seem a little familiar somehow.
I mean, when do you completely push the limit? I mean, I guess it's sort of based on the story. At some point you do want to, maybe in contrast, show something completely alien.
I feel like Star Wars, like the original one, might have done that a bit for that time. You know, that cantina and the ships. And I mean, maybe there were some things it was inspired by something, but it was pretty out there for the time. And it was, wildly successful. I remember watching it as a kid and it was amazing, so I think there are times when you can do that and you'll succeed. But I find more often than not that as a designer, I'll take inspiration from what's around me and change that into something just like the mangrove root, right? It exists here. But I think it is fun if you have the ingenuity to come up with something that we've never seen before. That I think that can be a lot of fun too.
I want to dive a little deeper into that relation between practical design and the virtual design. Julie, you mentioned it explicitly, and I have to admit that when I saw this list of films, I also had a bias against this film in the sense that it seems to be more generated in a way that would be easier in some levels. But in doing some research, I was reminded that the original film won in this category.
Yes.
How do they make the case for a film like this compared to some of the others on our list?
I think it's that everything is designed. The realm of design in a film like this isn't like we have this set and we have this time period and we have this whatever. It's so expansive. It's the vehicles. It's an entirely new world. And that was just like you. I also had the bias. And then when I thought about it a little bit harder, just really in terms of this conversation is what made me really think about it harder. I was like, maybe this is the winner. Like there's everything ground up design. Like imagine having to design what every plant looks like.
Right.
Like those things that we take for granted, or we're like, oh, we'll just go get some greenery for this area. And then we'll go get have the fancy drape made, like these things that are important and design choices, or like we'll do this kind of architecture or whatever. I'm not taking those things for granted, but everything is designed. And I think that makes a great case. And actually in thinking about it, I think it might win.
I definitely think it's got a good shot. I mean, it's the same. My fiance said, why is that? Like, it's all CG, and I was like, it's not. I said the same exact thing you said, Julie. I'm not going to reiterate it. And he went, oh, I didn't think about it like that. So I think there is that notion that a lot of people share that it's just made in a computer, but it's not pulled from some stock inventory of silhouettes or furniture, whatever, some sort of library. It's every single thing, every single piece. So yeah, it's a huge vision of an entire world. And to make it all make sense with all those different environments, real and in that world and underwater, takes a lot of thought and a lot of planning and a lot of coordination between departments. So I think it's epic.
So much.
And when you compare it to, and like look, I thought Fablemans looked great. But when I look at the presentation for Avatar and then I look at the presentation for Fablemans, I'm like, big deal a little bit. Because it's, it's his childhood home and it's period and it's gorgeous and the wallpaper, we'll get into that. But you think about the scale. What's funny is Fablemans is Rick Carter. So he won the Oscar for the first Avatar because he was the production designer of Avatar. He's super talented. But it's just funny, the scale is very much in play. Really, Avatar versus any of these. The amount of prep time and shooting and everything else, I'm sure was 3 times as much as any of these other shows. So I think it's a real contender in this category this year for sure.
In terms of scope, I did read an interview with the designers of Avatar, and they asked them like what their reaction was seeing the movie and like how that made them feel. And both of them were like, I just can't believe we did that. Like, oh my God, like that was so much work. Like, I can't believe that came together. I kind of marveled at that because I feel like when you watch something like this, you're like, they're pros, like they got this, like, but it's still, even for them, like an incredible feat.
I think it's easy to take it for granted because we see so much CGI generated stuff in video games and everywhere else, or even TV commercials. And there is kind of a sense that there's very little effort behind it. But as you guys have pointed out, every single item, there's a choice, there's a decision, there's design behind it. And it's interesting when you create a unique universe, it leads to that. In doing Severance, there's what we call the Lumen universe. Everything has to be filtered through. Well, would this be in the Lumen universe? How would this item look in the Lumen universe? And so there's a lot of thought and a lot of forethought that goes into every choice. I just wish the story had been better.
Yeah, maybe the next one.
Maybe the next one. But
Well, it is an aspect of these episodes that even a film that maybe I didn't enjoy for whatever reason, breaking it down into specifics of the nomination is always really educational. And with that in mind, let me bring your sense of design to the third film on our list, Babylon. Production design by Florencia Martin and set decoration Anthony Carlino.
I didn't see this one, so I'm going to have to sit this out.
I just did. I watched it for this podcast, and it starts with a bang. The beginning is really beautiful. Well, obviously they start in an exterior, but when you go into Wallach's party, it's insane. It's madness. While I was watching this movie, I was like a little bit jealous just in terms of how much fun it would have been to research this time period. And it's like old Hollywood. All the sets were beautiful. Another favorite of mine was the kinescope stages. Yeah. They were all exterior. I had no idea that existed. It makes a lot of sense now, like when films were silent and you need sunlight, lots of light, like you make these stages outside, but they had put them all, like all these strange sets right next to each other. Like on this one, we're shooting a bar. On this one, it's some like jungle thing. And on this one, and they're all just right next to each other. And I thought they did a really beautiful job with that. Yeah, it was a really, really fun to watch.
They built part of that exterior, the Don Wallachs. They built a partial exterior and then did like a VFX extension on that. That whole opening sequence was probably the biggest builds of the show, right? And it was done beautifully. They really dug into the research there. And I love the jewel tone palette. It's very lush and rich, and it's all the things, old Hollywood. And then you've got those desert landscapes where it's very dusty, and a bit more browns and tans. I think the biggest thing for Babylon is the research that it took, because I was looking at the research and I was looking at the stage sets that they did, and they're dead on. It's exactly that. So, replicating that in that way takes a lot of effort and detail and coordination, just like all the other films we're talking about. And then the multiple time periods showing the evolution of the business. I thought it was really beautiful. I wasn't a big fan of the film itself, but it looked great.
That's kind of speaking to your point, Skid, that like in terms of this conversation or whatever, or even in terms of our own crafts, where like what we work in, or even on, sometimes like you do separate your enjoyment of the story itself versus like the artistry in this other specific arena. I mean, I feel like I do that with things that I'm employed on sometimes also, like can still be really proud of that, even though you're like, I don't know, that script was interesting, but I think, same Eve. I feel the same way.
So you think from a production design perspective, the claims that this film has is the scale and scope of some of these sets and the detail of the history periods and the multiple periods involved in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
With a period film like that, the most important thing is getting it right. And sometimes you don't have as much room to create because you're beholden to what it was. But I think they played with color. I think they had a lot of fun. I think they found ways to do that. At least that's my sense, having seen it. But, you know, when I did the Western this is what they had. These things were not invented yet. The train hadn't made it that far west yet. And we had to exist within those boundaries. And you find little ways to be creative, but it is a bit more limiting than something like Avatar, where sky's the limit and you can really dream. I think that's why that one sticks out so much in this field, because it's the one that was able to do that, and all the rest are period pieces.
I think also in terms of like them having to stick to the time period, one thing that I did appreciate in this is that like there's definitely the like early heyday Hollywood lushness, like of the opening party scene, and then there's the like Hollywood's a new vast desert landscape, not a lot of development yet. But then there's also like a grittiness to like some of the other sets that I really appreciated, like Margot Robbie's.
Yeah, her apartment.
Oh yeah, and it was like kind of just down and dirty, and you kind of saw that juxtaposition, and maybe that is like very true to the time. But I think a lot of people will tend to like just make something pretty. Let's just make it pretty. But I really like that they went gritty with some of those sets too.
It was almost like a tenement.
Yeah.
Do you find that a lot of period films get nominated just because they're period?
Yeah.
I think that yes, maybe, but I also feel like inherently when you're doing something that people aren't seeing every day, and you can't just like go get it or go just like order it with ease, and you know that it involves more like thought and research, like I think that goes into that choice. But also yes, somewhat.
Yeah, Eve, I liked what you said earlier, because I remember a couple of years ago, what was it? News of the World was nominated in production design, and it was a beautiful movie, and it was very spare, as it had to be, because there's not a lot to work with. But I wonder, as a designer, as a decorator, do you find that not as much as enticing or as interesting, or is it just the challenge of, I mean, it almost seems like paint by numbers in a way. Am I off in that? Or
No, I think it can be. I think it depends on the story, right? And how much you have. I really enjoy doing period pieces, but what I've found lately and through the series I just did with Julie, I was able to do kind of a mashup where it was period, but then it almost had like a fantastical element because it's not rooted in reality, it's fiction. I don't know if I mentioned, but Julie and I worked on American Horror Stories together. And in our first episode of the second season, Dollhouse, we did this like Alice in Wonderland style thing. It's period 1960s. The house is a 1920s Victorian. We built the bedroom. I made it octagonal. So we were just playing with scale and all these things. So I was beholden to like, this is the type of telephone, right? Or Julie, like that we need in this space. These wallpapers are period. That makes sense in that period, and the furniture and decor. But then we did a lot of stuff within that didn't really necessarily exactly fit it, but fit the story and what we were trying to do with the story. So I find for me personally, as an artist, that's a much more exciting place to play, because I can create, I can dream a little and kind of go outside of the box. And that's kind of the case of that series as a whole. You're not really limited. So I think it'd be hard for me to now go do a historical fiction piece that's just straight historical, nonfiction or fiction, because that's it. You're like, this is what you're doing, and this is what it looked like, and this is what it needs to look like. And you'll have very few opportunities to dream outside of that. It does take a lot of work, and it is hard, and it takes talent and everything else to pull a period piece off. But I like when it's like some sort of mashup or hybrid where it's period and horror, period and sci-fi, whatever that is. There's a new Apple series coming out, I think it's about Lincoln, but it's thriller or something. And I'm like, that sounds cool, because maybe it doesn't have to be exactly accurate. I don't know. Like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was another one that I thought was really fun.
I think character gives a lot of opportunity. I know as a set dresser, I love it when I can really know the character and help bring the space that the character inhabits to life. So,
absolutely.
And so no matter what period it's in, hopefully the character will have an impact on the space, on the environment.
Yeah.
It's that final layer. Julie's excellent at that final layer that it just makes all the difference. We've all been in
Yeah.
sets that don't have it, and it feels like a set. It doesn't feel real or rooted in reality or tied to anybody in particular. But when you add in that last layer, that's what really sells it. And to your point, you can play in that realm, but that's more in her camp than my camp, right?
Yeah.
So that's down to you guys.
It's my favorite part.
And that's when it becomes the most frustrating when you're doing a series. I know we're talking about movies here, but I've done a lot of TV, and so often we're cut short on that last layering that really would send it home. And
Right.
it's frustrating. And so it's so gratifying when you work on a project where you actually have the time and the resources to get those last layers and details in that.
Julie managed to do it on our show. I don't know how she did it because we were so up against it with time. We were anthology, so every single one was different. And we had 3 period episodes. She got the 1960s one, and then we did a 1700s colonial episode that was called Milkmaids, and she had to do that, prep that in like 3 weeks.
I think I was sweating a lot all the time.
You were. One
But
day
it
I went
was
up to her,
so-
I'm like, your bangs are just like plaster to your forehead.
I was like, I don't care.
She's like, I can't look
but-
at any more mirrors, because we had like period mirrors and Bloody Mary. Like there was a lot, and you're really limited on time in TV. That's the thing, right? Like these
Such a
films, they probably didn't have enough time. Nobody has enough time.
No,
anymore.
there's never enough time.
The ask is too much for the time always, but they had more time than we have in TV for sure to really think these things out. But yeah, Julie killed it. It was amazing.
The 4th film on our list is Elvis. Production design by Catherine Martin and Karen Murphy. Set decoration by Bev Dunn.
So, we get our presentations with the ADG, and I always love to see everybody's process. It helps me decide who to vote for. And in there, they talked about how they delved into his life for 18 months. They came to Tennessee and traveled and saw his houses, the apartment where he lived, whatever was still standing. And they were able to actually go to Graceland and see his clothing and all the various things that they've collected that just gave them a sense of who he was as a person and his environments. And then they built that into the design, which I thought was excellent to hear. I think it's so rare you have the opportunity to do that kind of deep dive research. And it's almost like a forensic research at that level. It's almost like a crime scene. You're looking at every little detail, and then you're putting that into the design. And I thought it was really beautiful. I thought they nailed it. It's everything they did was so spot on for when you look at the research and then you look at what they created.
So going back to our last conversation about period pieces and just kind of replicating something that was, or not really being able to take it to a next new level, or I think that they did that in this. Everything is beautiful. Everything is stunning. The Beale Street, I mean, Catherine Martin is a genius. I have to say, and obviously as well as Karen Murphy and Beverly Dunn, but everything is so beautiful and so luscious. And I don't doubt that they did Graceland almost to the T, right? Or that Tupelo scenes were based on real research, but every set was so full and so rich and vibrant, but also so believable. But I think that they took the historical aspects of a lot of these sets and then one-upped it and made it sort of their own thing. I mean, it was stunning. This is what I would pick to win.
Yeah.
The carnival stuff, that house of mirrors, all the graphics, it's insane. It's so much work. It's just so good.
And again, they created an entire universe, even though it was historically accurate and historically true. Like you said, they took it up in a couple notches, not just one, but several. It was it was a beautiful film. I kind of had a visceral reaction to the movie though, and I couldn't finish it. And maybe I should go back and give it another shot. It was the first movie out of this collection that I saw. I don't know. I really had a hard time with the depiction, and that kind of took me out of looking at the sets and pulling me into the whole story of it and the production design.
I had a similar experience the first time I watched it. I did finish it though, but there was something about the energy was so frenetic in it. It was borderline seizure inducing. I was like, I can't. And I also originally had a little bit of trouble with believing Tom Hanks in that character. He's just so well known and so beloved, and he does a great job. But I was like, but that's Tom Hanks. You said that, and that was kind of pulling me out initially, but I definitely had remembered how beautiful it was. And then I watched it again recently, and the second viewing, it was much more palatable, and I enjoyed it a lot more.
It's so interesting. I mean, all her work, you know, Gatsby and all her collaborations with her husband are just sumptuous. They're just delicious to look at. You know, it's like for the eyes. And to your point, Julie, it's like they did take they took all that and they built it in there, and then they built on that in a way that not every film can do, I think. And I think that they were very creative. And the palette was just stunning. I mean, all the colors were so rich.
Did it pull you out of it at all? Were you ever like so taken in by the?
A little bit, like the frenetic energy for sure. Like, you know, I felt the same way.
But I meant the production design. Because the design was so sumptuous and the sets or in the palettes are so rich. Did that ever like distance you from the story?
A little bit. Yeah, I was looking at them a little more than paying attention to the characters, which doesn't happen often. Yeah, it's just gorgeous. I mean, I remember when I saw Gatsby too, I was just like, my mouth was on the floor. So they didn't disappoint with this. And they, you know, 2 years, they were prepping this for 2 years. And really, I mean, to have that kind of time to get into a story and to build the world and to build the story is incredible. So, and they did a fantastic job. And the cars, right? The cars were a big part.
Yeah.
For him and the world. And so in that point, they were very selective with the cars. They built Beale Street, right? They built the facade, and then they did the VFX extension. And to recreate that from nothing is it's pretty insane. And for it to look the way it did and just feel so rooted in reality and so real. Yeah,
Beale Street was amazing. It makes me wonder sometimes. I mean, this happens more often than not, where I think the production design actually upstages the story and the actors. Almost seems like something that producers should consider. Is your script up to the production design team that you have in place? Because if not,
at that point, you're into it, right?
Yeah, it's a little too late, I guess.
I also feel like
you got what you got.
Everything that Baz Luhrmann does is like intense on every level, right? Like the shots are always moving, the costumes are heightened, the production design is heightened, the editing, like everything I feel like he does is so heightened.
Right.
So it kind of feels on par with his aesthetic, that everything's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, for sure.
And they must just live it when they're on it. I mean, because they're a couple, right? So they must be like eat and sleep and dreaming, and like it just must be their world for that period of time. That's it. This is what they're doing. And that's so intense, you know. It obviously is very successful, but I think that would be really intense if I had to exist in that bubble the entire time.
I was kind of thinking about that in terms of, obviously they're like insanely creative powerhouse couple, but in terms of like, and don't misunderstand this statement, but like what kind of advantage she gets as a designer, like being in the story from the get-go and seeing everything from the get-go, as opposed to be like, we'll start her 6 months out or like 8 months or whatever.
Right.
Like she's living in it from the birth of the concept, right? Which I think is really interesting, and probably why she can double department head on such grand scale, because she's also the costume designer.
She's also nominated for costume design. We'll be talking about her again on the next episode. Overlapping production design and costume design, I don't know that I've ever else seen it. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about one person wearing both of those hats.
I initially, and like going back to earlier nominations of her being nominated for both, my initial reaction was like, like no fair. In the thick of production, like how do you do both of those? Every costume designer I know is always busy, drowning, always just so deep in it, 20 hours a day or whatever, even if it's just in their brain and they're not at work. And same with every production designer. So like, how do you do both? But I think that it kind of goes back to her being in it at such an early stage and probably conceptualizing things well before anybody else is even really starting, that makes her deserve those credits. But to that point, I was really happy to see her share a production design credit on this film. So there's a second, Karen Murphy, I think.
I think the scale was too big.
Yeah.
For her to honestly, even being in that early. Gatsby, she had an assistant production designer that I think probably oversaw when things got crazy, but that was a lot more contained, not completely contained, but compared to Elvis, a lot more contained. And that, so maybe she didn't need as much support, but yeah, I look at that and I'm like, I don't know how you do both. I don't even know how you do the one job. It's like, I know how you do it, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot. But I think you're right, Julie. I think being in ahead of time, thinking about it for months and months and months before things are actually happening, and having ideas on the costumes and the sets, it probably gets her really far ahead.
And then decision making is probably there's a shortcut there to get
Totally.
decisions.
Like, I like it, I don't like it. It's
Yeah.
like,
Or I'll ask him when I get home or whatever. You know, like,
yeah.
What do you think of this? All right. Good night, dear.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, the final film on our list is The Fabelmans, production design by Rick Carter, set decoration by Karen O'Hara.
I got a big yawn out of this production design. And it's maybe that's a little harsh. It was, and my wife pointed out, she says, well, I said it looks like sets. Everything looked like a movie set. And she says, yeah, no, I think that was intentional. It was supposed to look like a movie set. I was like, oh, all right. They succeeded, but I don't think that deserves much notice in terms of a nomination or a win.
It's hard in this with all these other contenders. I kind of watching it, I felt the same way. I was like, but it felt like it was all purposeful and
Yes.
exactly as it should be.
Yes.
I imagine. And again, like a lot of research into time period, and I'm sure a lot of attention to detail, but also kind of when you put it next to Elvis or Avatar, you're just like, it's really nice. Like they did a wonderful job, and they're obviously incredibly skilled and have a long history of accolades, and both Rick Carter and Karen O'Hara. But yeah, it's a quieter film, and the design is quieter. And I think that in this set of nominees, it's the quieter option, I guess. Also.
Yeah, it feels like I liked all the textures, like the wallpapers and the curtains and the rugs and the fabrics. Everything was on point for the period, and it felt right. And it did feel intentionally setty. But it was a bit of a yawn. I completely agree with you, Kerry. Like it's sentimental and it's sweet and the performances were good. And I get that it's, Spielberg's story, but it doesn't really feel up to the level of these other four as far as scope and scale and design. Totally. It just feels like, yeah, that's what that should look like. It didn't kind of inspire me in any other way. And Rick Carter's, he's a genius. He's fantastic. But yeah, it's like, I guess I kind of wondered, is this nominated because it's Rick Carter and Spielberg? If it was two other filmmakers, would this be on the list?
Right. Yeah. I really like the prop. So I was
Yeah.
totally enamored with the movie camera coming out of the box and all that. I thought, oh, that was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's no small feat. Any of it, I think, it's
Sure.
no small feat.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. But kind of back to what Kerry was saying earlier, like, do you think some things get nominated just because they're period? And this might be a case where I'm like, oh, maybe. Or saying, just as Eve said, because of who did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking about this the other day. The awards season, it just, there's a lot of campaigning going on. There's the films with the most money that do a lot of press, and they send out the screeners, and I'm also getting these little booklets in the mail with promoting sets and things, and that's all fine and well, and that's ADG, not Oscars, but I believe in merit-based. I believe in this this earned it, this is deserving to be nominated. And I think in the period, it's nominated in the period category in the ADG, which makes sense to me because there's 5 nominees in that category. But with only 5 nominees overall for Oscars, should Woman King have been in this bunch? There were other films, I think, on the radar that had a little more scope and scale, and maybe not the pedigree. So it's hard to know what they were thinking when these nominations came down. But and again, it's a good movie. It's well designed. It's as it should be. It's a very startling juxtaposition against the other four in the race, I think.
Yeah.
We like to give shout outs to films that didn't make the final list, but that you thought were noteworthy in 2022. Eve, you mentioned The Women King. Is there specific aspects of that you thought it should be on this list that you want to call out?
Again, it was kind of creating this world, and there was just so much scope and scale, and it was beautifully executed and done and beautifully shot and beautifully acted. And it's all the things. And I saw that it was on the list. They had all the list running of what might be on there. And I thought it had a really good shot. I was kind of surprised when it didn't make the cut.
Julie, Kerry, other films that you thought were noteworthy last year?
For me, it's Bardo, which I think should be nominated for everything. I think I'm so kind of alone in that, especially just one of my favorite movies I saw last year. But I thought production design was beautiful, and I thought the film was so great. I mean, it's like real life and so much surrealism all kind of coming together, and it's visually stunning. I'm sad I didn't see that one anywhere.
It's on the cinematography list.
Just kidding. Well, yeah, I guess I didn't see that. Look at that list.
And it's up for an ADG, I'm pretty sure.
I think it got some SDSA also, but I mean, I'm talking like best picture. I think it should be there. I also think it should be in this category. I think it got a little shunned.
Kerry, how about you? Any other films?
The only thing that pops into my head for some reason is Emily the Criminal, which was a small movie, low budget, very delightful. Took place in LA and sort of showed a underside of LA in a nice way. But I don't think it was worthy of being nominated. But that's the only thing I can recall that off the top of my head right now.
Kerry, Liz Tunkel, the production designer on that, she was on the show to talk about Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, that she was also the production designer for. And I also enjoyed Emily the Criminal. She might be back. I'm going to tell her how much you liked it as well, and then we'll see if she can come back and talk about it.
That's with Aubrey Plaza, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it. It was good. I liked it.
Yeah, it was good.
All right, on that note, we're going to call it a wrap. Thanks so much for sharing your insights. It was really fun having you guys here today.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, kid.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. This is Oscar episode 7 of 10, so if you missed any, I hope you'll check them out before the Academy Awards ceremony on March 12th. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.